Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Ping Liang, the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan's immediate past president. I want to welcome everybody to the final presentation of our fall lecture on Persia and Iran. How many of you have attended all 4 programs? Please raise your hand. Excellent, yeah. 3 programs? And I got to raise my hand. I had to miss one because I had to go to China for business trip. Well, we thank all of you for having come to our programs, and we think it has been very exciting. And you will notice on your seat that there is a survey. So we would very much appreciate your giving us some feedback. And as an incentive, we will give you a 20% off coupon at the Schuler bookstore at the end of today. So if you can kindly, complete a survey and give it back to us, will be wonderful. Also, I just wanted to mention if any of you have not joined the World Affairs Council as members, please, we welcome you to join us. So there will be membership forms outside at the front desk. So please consider joining. Great Decision program, as everybody knows, that is a very important series. The major lecture series for the World Affairs Council begins Monday, February 9th. So please mark your calendar. And our annual dinner speaker will be announced next week. Right now, we are actually, signing contract, so I cannot actually release the speaker's name as well. But we're sure that a lot of you have attended the annual dinner before, so our speakers are usually very, very exciting. And I would encourage you to visit the World Affairs Council website and watch the newspaper to find out who it will be. Let me just mention a couple of the trips that World Affairs Council usually organizes. And I'm sure that some of you have already received the flyers. If you haven't, we have more flyers at the front desk. All these are the World Affairs Council trips, which means very unusual itineraries and political culture and economic discussions and great people. Because they are, all World Affairs Council members like yourself. So I think, you might want to, look through those programs and see if you might be interested in any of the trips. Next year at this time, the World Affairs Council will be going to Saudi Arabia with Ambassador Mark Johnson. Our executive director, everybody knows, Dixie Anderson. She has gone on the trip, I believe was last December, to Saudi Arabia. And according to Dixie, Ambassador Johnson is an excellent tour guide and host, very, very knowledgeable. So, there are a lot of other itineraries should you be interested in other parts of the world. So if you have any questions about any of the trips, just give Dixie Anderson a call at our council. I'm sure she'll be delighted to explain to you how it works. Now, to our evening's panel discussion. We end our series with a current look at the political situation in Iran, as well as its relations with its neighbors and the United States. We have 3 distinguished panelists. I will introduce our moderator, and he will in turn introduce the other 2 panelists. Dr. Maj Al-Mala received his PhD in Arabic and Comparative Literature from Indiana University and serves as director of the Middle East Studies program at Grand Valley State University. He currently teaches Arabic at elementary and intermediate levels, as well as Middle East Studies courses on civilization, culture, and literature at the university. Dr. Al-Mala, Please. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome to all of you. I'm very pleased to see a big audience. I'm glad that you're interested in the series, and I'm very happy to introduce the speakers and serve as a moderator for the session. I want to. Our final session is basically under the title of U.S. And Iran at the crossroads, trends and issues that will impact the future. I'm going to introduce the speakers. I'm going to introduce each of them separately, and then after I will probably try to facilitate some questions, and then really pass it on to you all. I will have the microphone, and if you have any question, I'll get it to you so that you can ask your question. So that's our plan for the evening. Our first speaker is Saeed Khan, who is currently in the Department of History and lecturer in the Department of Near East and Asian Studies at Wayne State University. He is also adjunct professor in Islamic Studies at the University of Detroit and has taught modern Middle Eastern and world history at Henry Ford College in Dearborn. He will be talking on trends and issues that will impact the future by looking at past and present. So please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Majid, and also thank you all for being here on a Thursday evening. I promise to get you home before Grey's Anatomy is over. At least that's what I tell my students. So again, thank you so much to the World Council or the World Affairs Council for having us here. Most of us in this room are probably familiar with what happened in 1979 when it came to the Iranian Islamic Revolution, as well as the taking of more than 52 American hostages, what was then distilled down to 52 hostages who were kept captive for 444 days and launched the career of Ted Koppel on a new show called Nightline. We have Iran in our collective consciousness again. Certainly in an election year, we know that Iran is being invoked as a potential threat and certainly a major issue facing whoever is going to be the next American president. In order to understand what may face the next president, I think it's important to examine what has been the relationship between the United States and Iran in the past. It is clearly not something that is monolithic, and you might find that it is in many ways quite surprising how the relationship has evolved, particularly when we consider that it is not that old a relationship. Prior to World War I, in fact, Iran didn't really register on the American radar. It was, for the most part, a European-oriented issue, and one that really permeated the minds and the policies of two countries, one being Russia and the other being Great Britain. For the United Kingdom, or for Great Britain, the primary interest was Iranian oil, which was slowly coming into being. But more importantly, Britain needed to have some protection and some security in order to maintain its imperial chain, stretching from, of course, Great Britain, stretching all the way to Asia, including the jewel of the crown in the British Empire, the Indian sub-empire, or the Indian subcontinent, if you will. You probably also recall that the famous saying that the sun never set on the British Empire. Well, certainly India placed a prominent role in that empire. And it was important for the British to maintain easy and navigable waters to its eastern frontier. To counterweight this, Russia, and still is, seeking a warm water port or some kind of warm water access. And this tended to dominate its interest in Iran because of course, Iran's proximity to the Persian Gulf. Otherwise, if you notice a map of the Soviet Union or Russia, not too many places to be able to get by without an icebreaker. The Baltics, the Pacific are certainly treacherous waters. The only other places were the Black Sea, going through the Bosphorus Straits into Turkey and then the Mediterranean, or the Persian Gulf. In fact, for the British and for the Russians, Iran was such a pivotal place that during World War I, both countries occupied Iran. The Russians created a sphere of influence in the north, the British in the south, and they kept a neutral buffer region in the middle of Iran, primarily to keep from having to face each other. During the period between World War I and World War II, the same interests for both the Russians as well as for the British existed. Oil now becoming a dominant factor for the British, and for Russia, again, serving as a counterweight because Russia was now the Soviet Union. It is during World War II that America finally places some kind of foray into Iran. During World War II, at the behest of the British in particular, the United States sends in military advisors, one being, and here's a name that will probably ring familiar to you, Norman H. Schwarzkopf. Except in this case it was Norman H. Schwarzkopf Sr., Stormin Norman's dad, Stormin Norman I, I guess you can call him, who simply had an advisory role in maintaining Iran's security in the onset of Germany's interest in the oil fields, as well as possible Soviet expansion by Stalin. With the presence of the Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, Britain, and to a lesser degree the United States' influence in the region was now starting to switch to the all-important factor of oil. In fact, the British had long since established what was called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Corporation, based in Abadan in the south. In 1951, Iran had a democracy. I know that seems to be a strange word to associate with Iran in today's parlance. In fact, though, as some may know, Iran is still a democracy. But in 1951, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh was elected. He was part of a coalition known as the National Front, which was a kind of hodgepodge of different groups, including left-leaning secular intellectuals, some moderates and some conservatives. Most of them were put together in this coalition because of their opposition to the Shah and his autocratic rule. Well, Mossadegh decides to overstep his bounds in the eyes of the British by nationalizing Iran's oil industry. Now, a point on nationalization. Nationalization doesn't mean that you simply grab an asset. It is, according to international law, incumbent upon the nation to then pay just compensation to the corporations from which you are seizing the industry. Well, the British were furious because after World War II, the British economy was certainly not in a very strong position. It was starting to erode its empire. It had already ceded the Middle East. It had already ceded the Indian subcontinent. And so one of its economic as well as its prestige factors, meaning the Iranian oil, had been taken away. The British in 1951 and 1952 approached the United States. Churchill tries to implore Truman to take some action against this upstart named Mossadegh. Except Truman had different ideas. He didn't really see this as being much of a threat to American national security interests, and Truman had bigger fish to fry, one being in Korea, and the other, of course, being what he perceived to be the bigger Soviet threat in countries like Turkey and Greece, which were the backbone of his Truman Doctrine. But time has a strange and ironic way of creating a sense of patience and a second bite at the apple. And in 1953, Churchill gets that with the election of Dwight Eisenhower. His old buddy from World War II, Eisenhower also had a Secretary of State by the name of John Foster Dulles, who was vehemently anti-communist. And Churchill was able to play on the fears of both Dulles as well as Eisenhower that this would set a ripple effect across the Middle East and perhaps make the area vulnerable to Soviet expansion. Eisenhower accepts this, and in fact, he then tries to get Dulles to do something about it. Well, as luck would have it, Dulles' brother, Allen Dulles, was the founder of the Central Intelligence Agency. And so Allen, along with John Foster, who used to be a partner at Kirkland & Ellis, Dr. Sabki, we were talking about Kirkland & Ellis before, was insistent on getting Kermit Roosevelt, the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt, to whom he gave 2 suitcases or briefcases with about 150,000 American dollars in it, which back then was a lot of money. I won't comment about what it means now, to show up in Iran and undertake what was called Operation Ajax, to create enough of an insurgency on the ground that ultimately overthrows Mossadegh and brings the Shah back in power fully, whereas he had gone on vacation, shall we say, for about a week, fearing that he was going to be deposed anyway. It is after this point that the United States solidifies its relationship with Iran, and more specifically with the Shah of Iran. In 1955, Iran becomes a key ally in fighting communism when it is a signatory to what's known as the Baghdad Pact, which is sort of an Asian version of NATO. The United States, Britain, Pakistan, Turkey, Iran, and Iraq all are signatories to this, and they form kind of a southern buffer to any kind of Soviet expansion further south. Now, the Shah was a dream or a fantasy ally for the United States. He was staunchly anti-communist. He was also anti-Arab nationalist, which was another concern for the United States in the region of the Middle East. He was also not Sunni Muslim, and Dr. Sabki will discuss in greater detail the difference between Sunni and Shi'i Islam. So he served as a counterweight to any possible Islamist tendencies that could emerge in the region during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And he was also not Arab. Persians, as you know, come from the Indo-Aryan family as opposed to the Semitic family of the Arabs. So close was Iran when it came to being a strategic ally that under the Nixon administration, well, let me go ahead and ask a question here. Historically, and let's say before 1979, who were America's 2 biggest allies in the Middle East? Don't worry, this isn't for a grade. Saudi Arabia, okay, we got one. Not Egypt, not Turkey, not Iraq, not Israel. It was Iran. Come on, I practically gave you that one. Both of these countries were stable monarchies, staunchly anti-communist, staunchly anti-Arab secular nationalist, and they served as being the geographic twin pillars by buttressing the all-important petroleum passageway of the Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia to the west and south, Iran to the north and the east. Each country was a major oil producer. In fact, they were the top 2 oil producers. And so the United States definitely shaped its policy around these countries. So integral was Iran that Nixon authorized Iran to be able to purchase any non-nuclear weapon in the American arsenal. And so by 1979, it had the F-14 Tomcat fighters, as well as the most sophisticated missiles, as well as the most sophisticated tanks. But the United States turned a blind eye to, and perhaps tacitly approved of, and maybe even outright supported, the Shah's atrocities vis-a-vis his own people when it came to the suppression of basic human and civil liberties. The tyrannical rule was buttressed by the Shah's infamous Savak, his secret police force, and it persisted through the late 70s. It was nature that actually does the Shah in. In 1978, his health deteriorates through pancreatic cancer, and his popularity, if you want to call it that, or his ability to maintain control of Iran is slowly dissipating. The Carter administration vacillates. On the one hand, it wants to support a loyal ally in the region, a region that has maintained a certain level of volatility. But yet the Carter administration is also conflicted because, on the other hand, it is promoting an agenda and a policy of human rights promotion. Carter tries to place some kind of pressure on the Shah, but he knows it might be futile because he's not sure about how long the Shah is going to be in place. And in fact, on January the 16th of 1979, the Shah abdicates. He tries to install a caretaker Republican government, Republican with a small r, I now have to make the distinction out in the west side of Michigan, and leaves the country seeking medical treatment. At the same time, the exiled cleric, the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, returns from Paris, where he had been banished, and interestingly works with Iran's left-leaning secular intellectuals who were the domestic movement against the Shah. He brings in a new representative government, but ultimately Khomeini sort of pushes out the left-leaning intellectuals and installs what I believe Dr. Sabki will talk about in brief, the Vilayat al-Faqih, which is the rule of the jurist. This is particularly prominent within the minority sect in Islam, Shi'ism, and in fact it's even a minority view within Shi'i political thought. Many people think that the revolution itself was the catalyst for the taking of American hostages. It was not. In fact, the taking of American hostages, if you recall, happens in October of 1979, and only because the United States refuses to hand over the Shah of Iran, who had now come to the United States at the behest of David Rockefeller to seek medical treatment. When they refused to extradite him to stand trial in Iran, the Iranians go ballistic. And they stormed the U.S. Embassy. This was a movement primarily led by university students. It then becomes a cause célèbre. When they go into the embassy and they take it over, initially not intending to have the hostages, but then realizing that this could be a bargaining chip to turn over the Shah, they also find in the basement of the embassy the CIA bureau office. They find a plethora of shredded documents, shredded communiques, which some of these students then over several months painstakingly put back together and discover the chain and the transmission between the CIA and the Shah of Iran when it came to suppressing dissident and opposition movements, sometimes quite violently. The Shah dies in July of 1980 in Egypt, and clearly U.S. diplomatic relations with Iran have not been the same since we broke off diplomatic relations with Iran, coincident to the emergence of what can loosely be called a theocratic regime. In the almost 30 years since the Iranian Islamic Revolution, the relationship, though, has primarily been a war of words. There has not been any direct confrontation between the two countries. And in fact, there have been some ironic points of contact, namely in 1987, the Iran-Contra affair, where somehow or the other the United States, in order to circumvent the Boland Amendment, decides to go ahead and goad Israel to sell weapons, because remember there's an arms embargo against the United States, and the only two countries in the Middle East that have spare parts or who use F-14s, for example, are Iran and Israel. So the Israelis sell the weapons to Iran. Iran then gives the money to the Saudis then funnel the money to buy weapons to give to the Contras who were opposed to the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. Kind of a If I drew the schematic, it would look much prettier. In that sense, though, it shows a certain practicality and it shows a certain bifurcation from the rhetoric that we oftentimes hear about Iran. Now remember, in 1986, 1987, this was in the midst of an 8-year war that Iran was prosecuting against Iraq. A war that was quite costly. About 1.5 million people lost their lives, and the United States was giving tacit at best and sometimes open support to Iraq. And despite that, Iran was willing to make a deal with the United States. In 2005, to bring it up to the more current, was the election of somebody whom you've probably seen on TV. He's the one with the members-only jacket, clearly outdated, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. A matter of intense scrutiny, primarily because of his rhetoric. In the last 30 years since the end of the revolution and the emergence of a theocracy in Iran, Iranian foreign policy has been surprisingly consistent, and for the most part so is American foreign policy toward Iran. Not too many drastic and dramatic changes. If you want to understand then what Iran's policies are behind or besides the trash talking of Ahmadinejad, it is primarily that Iran wants to be a regional actor. It wants to be a player, and it wants to have a chip in the great game of Middle East regional politics. It primarily sees itself as a champion on behalf of the rights and interests of the Shi'i Muslims. It is the largest Shi'i Muslim country in the world. There are about 10 to 15% of the entire Muslim population worldwide is Shi'i, concentrated in Iran, southern Iraq, which Dr. Sabki will address, as well as small pockets on the east coast of Saudi Arabia, as well as in the United Arab Emirates, and 75% of the Petro Island of Bahrain, even though it's ruled by a Sunni monarchy. So it saw itself as being a counterweight to Saudi or Wahhabi pressure on the Shi'i community. It also then sees itself as supporting other regional interests like Hezbollah, which starts off as a Shia resistance movement in Lebanon, the Shi'i in Iraq, to a certain degree, as we've been seeing played out over the last 5 years, and to a certain degree even the Shia in Afghanistan, whom al-Qaeda in 2002 massacred in the town of Mazar-e Sharif. Mainly, though, Iran positions itself as a counterweight to Saudi Arabia for regional dominance. Secondarily, it does so in the interest of being a counterweight to American development of spheres of influence in the region, namely in Israel, Saudi Arabia, and now in Iraq and Afghanistan. The malfunctioning policy of the United States in Iraq and to a certain degree Afghanistan has only served to embolden Ahmadinejad, who sees himself as the Middle East version of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. That's why they tend to get along so well. What needs to be done, though, so that I can wrap up in a couple minutes? First of all, there needs to be an understanding by the United States that Ahmadinejad is not Iran, and he is not the power structure of Iran. He's merely a mouthpiece who is placed up there, puppet-like, by the Revolutionary Council of Iran, which is the clerics. The leadership of Iran is neither stupid nor deranged. U.S. policy is not stupid enough to be goaded into armed conflict, and certainly this was informed in 2006 by the Lebanon War, which was in essence a proxy war between the U.S. and Iran involving Israel and Hezbollah. And given the fact that Hezbollah maintained its ground, certainly sent shockwaves in the circles of the Pentagon and the State Department in then reformulating its rhetorical, its political, and even its diplomatic relationship and posture toward Iran. The recognition that Iran, whether we like it or not, is a regional force because of either oil wealth, ideological strength, either in the affirmative as being a Shia political epicenter or in the negative as a counterweight to American interests. Understanding that Iran understands the region better than we do because it's their home turf. And also recognizing once and for all that Iran is not going to nuke Israel. Again, Iran is quite aware of the consequences. And also, again, one of these crazy ironies, there was a Guardian, a newspaper out of England, an article several months ago which said that Israel was, in fact, violating the international oil boycott of Iran by purchasing oil directly from Iran. The solutions, therefore, and I'll just wrap this up in about a minute, are engagement, negotiation. Iran wants to be a player, and in exchange for a seat at the table, the United States should certainly try to press for compliance on nuclear issues, but more importantly on sovereign integrity of countries like Iraq and Afghanistan. A comprehensive re-examination of U.S. foreign policy in the region away from the current Bush doctrine, whatever Charlie Gibson meant by that, to Sarah Palin. A holistic approach to achieve key solutions, peace plans, cooperations to combat terrorism, as well as regional economic development. And finally, a reevaluation of primary threats to U.S. strategic interests. It is not Iran, and really it's not al-Qaeda anymore. One has to wonder why there's been a lull in the rhetoric of al-Qaeda. It is directly correlated to both American performance in the region as well as American economic malaise. Russia certainly is at the top of the agenda that the United States needs to be concerned about, as well as the decline in American economic independence to countries like China and also to India. With Iran being within the discussion, there is optimism for a real and beneficial American policy to secure its national, regional, and strategic interests. But it's important to recognize that Iranian strategic interests are born of pragmatism and the assertion of and the projection of influence regionally. One of the problems that America has had in its rather short relationship and interaction with Iran is that at the time when Iranian-U.S. relationships were at their best, America was not investing with nor negotiating with Iran as a country. It was negotiating with one individual, the Shah. And the irony is that while the Middle East certainly likes its fair share of cults of personality, it has never been within American foreign policy a comfort level to deal with just one individual. If America starts to examine Iranian foreign policy not from the lens of a single individual, whether it's the Shah or whether it's Ahmadinejad, and starts to look at it more as a comprehensive prerogative, there is quite a bit of optimism when it comes to the relationship between these two. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Hisham Sebki, who is a professor at Eastern Michigan University, who has a long resume of accomplishments, including being a teaching fellow at Harvard, visiting professor at the University of United Arab Emirates, and also a visiting professor at King Abdulaziz University, and my favorite, a graduate of Indiana University. Please welcome him.
Thank you, Dr. Mallah. I don't know whether I deserve the compliment, but you and I are IU graduates, so I'll take it. Let me first thank the World Affairs Council for inviting me to take part in this presentation tonight. I'm going to start by the following. A scorpion wanted to cross a river, and obviously he couldn't. So he approached a frog and said, "Would you help me cross the river?" The frog said, "Well, what guarantee do I have that you will not sting me in the middle of the river?" The scorpion said, "That would be crazy, because you and I will drown." So a deal was struck. The scorpion and the frog were in the middle of the river, and all of a sudden, the frog felt that he did it. She said, "What are you doing?" "We'll both drown." He said, "Welcome to the Middle East." Let me now say a few words about Iran and the Muslim Shiite. The word Shiite in Arabic means partisans or supporters of. Currently, it's used to refer to the people who adhere to the Shiite sect of Islam. Basically, it started when Ali, the son-in-law the Prophet as a leader of the Islamic nation, he was by the beginning of Shiite Islam. So this is really the beginning, therefore, if you will, of a split in Islam, not exactly a split, but taking two different directions. The problem occurred initially because two groups wanted to have one of their people as the successor to the Prophet. The first group was from Mecca, from the tribe and the clan of the Prophet Muhammad, who felt they deserved to have one of them become the caliph. They were the early supporters of the Prophet. They were from his own tribe. The second was the group from Medina, where Muhammad and his early believers sought refuge after they left Mecca. So here we had two groups trying to get their men to become the caliph. Ultimately, the caliph was chosen from Quraysh, that is, the tribe of the Prophet. There was a group, however, within the group of Mecca, who felt that somebody is more deserving to succeed the Prophet than anybody else, and that is Ali, the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, and the father of Al-Hussein, Al-Hassan Al-Hussein, the grandchildren of the Prophet Muhammad. They said if the Mecca group claim that they are more deserving because they happen to be from the same tribe as Muhammad, here is a member of the tribe and the clan of the Prophet, plus a blood relative of the Prophet Muhammad. Ali, by the way, was a cousin of the Prophet Muhammad in addition to being his son-in-law. So that's how the problem started, if you will. Al-Hassan, the oldest son of Ali, gave up his right to the caliphate. His younger brother, Al-Hussein, did not. He was led to believe that if he would go to Iraq, he would find support among the people of Iraq, or southern Iraq, I should say. Unfortunately, he believed that, and Muawiyah and his army were waiting for him, and in the battle which ensued, Hussein was killed. Until today, Shiites they blame themselves for the death of Al-Hussein in Karbala. They felt that they betrayed him, they let him to come to Iraq, and then they abandoned him, and that's the reason he was killed. So in that sense, therefore, we say the Iranians who are Shiites, the other Shiites in the region feel that this is the beginning really of true Shiite Islam, the martyrdom of Hussein, the youngest son of Ali ibn Abi Talib. The Persians converted to Islam, but there was a little bit of resentment. They had a superior civilization than the Arabs. They viewed the Arabs as tribes, warring tribes coming from the interior of the Arabian Peninsula, whereas the Persians obviously had a long history of civilization. You might say there is a bit of rivalry between the Arabs and the Persians in that respect. Overwhelmingly, the Iranians are Shiites, whereas mainly the Arabs are mainly Sunnis. It is interesting to note that the Iranians cast a holy umbrella over the family of the Prophet, who, interestingly enough, is an Arab, is not an Iranian. The Iranians gained power to a degree during the Abbasid period. However, later they did not give up their religious or political identity as Shiites. They always maintained that they were Shiites. The rivalry between Iraq and Iran is but one manifestation of the Persian-Arab rivalry. It is only natural that the Shiites in the Arab countries be present in the vicinity of Iran. 70 or 75% of the people of Bahrain happen to be Shiites. 60% of the Iraqis happen to be Shiites. 33% of the Kuwaitis. 25% of the people of the UAE. The only major exception to that is that there are many Shiites in Lebanon, which obviously is way far away from Iran. It is on the Mediterranean Sea. The rest of the Shiites are in the vicinity of Iran as such. Needless to say that the Arab Shiites feel an affinity towards Iran and get a feeling of empowerment from it. Nowhere more so today than in Iraq and in Lebanon. Iraq has always been governed by a Sunni-dominated government, even going back to the days of the monarchy, the pro-Western monarchy in Iraq. So from the beginning of the state of Iraq in 1932, it was ruled by a Sunni-dominated government. However, the majority of the population happens to be of the Shiite sect of Islam. They finally, that is the Shiites, were able to gain power in Iraq for the first time after the United States invaded Iraq in 2003. It is interesting to note in here that the fall of the secular Ba'athist regime in Baghdad was facilitated by the Arab Sunni governments in the Persian Gulf, that is Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the rest. Later, they began to worry about the increasing power of Iran in Iraq and in Lebanon. In Lebanon, the Shiites have been at the bottom of the socio-political economic ladder. They were energized by a cleric by the name of Musa al-Sadr. He was able to lift their spirit and helped in the process of displacing their feudal lords who basically paid very little attention to the Shiites in Lebanon. A new generation of educated, politically sophisticated young Shiites began to appear in Lebanon as such. The Israeli war of 2006 and the strong resistance shown by Hezbollah. Hezbollah, by the way, in Arabic means the party of God. The main Shiite forces in Lebanon was admired throughout the Arab world. Here is a small fighting force, maybe a few thousand, being able to stand against the Israeli army, the strongest army in the region and one of the strongest armies in the world. It was viewed as a major victory for the Arabs against the Israeli Defense Force. Even those Arab states who at the beginning accused Hezbollah of being reckless because they took few Israeli prisoners, ultimately they have to tone down their criticism because of Arab public opinion, which was very much in favor of Hezbollah standing against the Israelis. Hezbollah became the hero of the Arabs. The problem in here was that there were two competing forces within the Shiite community. Hezbollah was the hero of the Arabs because of its stand in Lebanon. But in Iraq, the Shiites welcomed the U.S. invasion. How could you reconcile opposing the U.S. and the Israeli policies in Lebanon and then supporting the U.S. policies in Iraq? Obviously, that put even Hezbollah in a dilemma because there is a contradiction, obviously, between what Hezbollah is doing in Lebanon and what the Shiites are doing in Iraq. The U.S. policies in the region was touched upon by my good friend Taid. All what I will say is the following. Iran tacitly supported our invasion of Iraq. They looked the other way. In fact, they may have encouraged us to go after their enemy. Saddam Hussein was an enemy of Iraq. He was a secular leader. The Iranians obviously are anything but secular. So the problem in here is as follows. The United States helped in overthrowing Saddam Hussein in Iraq. It also helped in overthrowing the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. Two Sunni-dominated forces, enemies, you might say, of Iran, were toppled by the United States. Did we do Iran a favor? I think we did. By toppling these two regimes? Definitely we did. If you take a look at the Iranian policies, the Iranians referred to the United States as the Great Satan. The Great Satan was a good angel when it ended the regime of Saddam Hussein, but they reverted back to being the Great Satan later on after we accomplished the job of overthrowing Saddam Hussein. The Iranian leadership is shrewd, manipulative, and played the game of politics well. In Iraq, the Shiites are mainly content with but Muqtada Sadr, a leader of the poor Shiites, is taking a different approach and is calling for the end of the U.S. occupation in Iraq. What is significant is that for the first time, the Shiites were able to gain power in Iraq, a major Arab state. The Shiites in Saudi Arabia have had their share of being left out and are sympathetic, obviously, with Iran. Again, the Iranian Revolution of 1979 gave them hope and strength. The main presence of the Shiites in Saudi Arabia happens to be in the eastern region, and that's where the oil is. The oil-producing region of Saudi Arabia is the place where the Shiites stay in the kingdom. It is an important factor if Iran is attacked by the United States forces. Obviously, the Shiites will play a significant role in trying, obviously, to be an obstacle to any attempt on the part of the U.S. or even Israel to attack Iran. In Bahrain, the king is a Sunni, as our friend Saeed said. 75% of the people are Shiites. The underlying factor between the Sunnis and the Shiites, again, is many states in the region are governed by Sunnis, but the majority or a significant minority live in that place. Bahrain, majority. Iraq, majority. Lebanon, around 35 to 40%. The Emirates, Kuwait. But in particular, it was very true in Iraq and is still very true in Bahrain. In Kuwait, a certain group tried to assassinate the Emir of Kuwait when Iraq and Iran were locked in a war which lasted up to 8 years. The reason for that is that the Kuwaitis sided with Iran. The Kuwaitis sided with Iraq in the war. When it comes to other Shiite groups in the Emirates, they are well off. I think the worst of the group would be the Shiites in Saudi Arabia because they are suppressed. In Kuwait, they are doing well. In the Emirates, they are doing well. In Saudi Arabia, it is a different story. It's interesting to note that the headquarters of the U.S. fleet in the Persian Gulf happens to be in Bahrain. The U.S. has bases in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Qatar. The ascendancy of the Shiite power in Iraq sounded an alarm in the region. The king of Jordan, King Abdullah, began to speak about the Shiite crescent, meaning a crescent which would go from Tehran to Damascus, through Syria to Beirut, Lebanon. That sentiment was echoed also by the president of Egypt, President Hosni Mubarak. The Saudis are the first to be afraid of any advance of Iran in the Arabic-speaking countries. In fact, the Saudis were responsible for our decision to create a counterforce to the Shiite groups in Iraq, that is the Al-Sahwa, which is made mainly of tribes who are Sunnis, not Shiites. In conclusion, I would say the Sunni-Shiite rivalry was dominant until the United States invasion and the awakening of the Shiite sense of power in Iraq and Lebanon. Iran, I think, and I agree with Saeed fully, will eventually reach an agreement with the United States. They are pragmatic. They will pursue a policy which will benefit Iran as a state and obviously will advance the cause of Shiite Islam. Thank you.
So the plan now is to open it up for discussion. I will use the microphone right here. All right. Is it working? It is working. So, any questions? Yes, let's start there. We'll get the microphone for you.
There's a lot of hysteria about the whole nuclear issue, and I've been curious about two things. One is, did we cause more activity that way by saying they were, put their name on the list of evil, so that if I was the leader of that country, I think I'd need to defend myself? But that's my first question. And the other is, where are we with them regarding nuclear? What's our stand? Are we more hysterical than we need to be? What's the future of that? I'm curious.
Thank you. All right, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Wow, is there hysteria? Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment to say that there's hysteria about the nuclear program. if you look at what American policy has been regarding the issue of a nuclear Iran, clearly it has informed the election. It has been a major plank to try to assert the credentials of either candidate. And in a sense, it has also been used as a Trojan horse to establish American positions in other countries, such as this missile defense system with listening centers or other telemetry centers in places like Poland, in places like the Czech Republic. And clearly Russia has bitten back. And so that's why if you notice, when I had said that some of the main priorities that the United States has to contend with in the new administration is really putting Russia at the top of its list. We saw what happened with the state of Georgia and what has been going on there. That is a direct backlash to what Russia has perceived as being the encroachment onto either former satellites or spheres of influence or former Soviet territory. And Russia is still pretty touchy when it comes to those subjects. It has been done under the pretext of Iran, and Russia's not buying it. Neither Russia nor Europe, having just returned from London last week, England is not talking about Iran at all. They don't feel as though they are entering in a sequel to the Cold War and they're going to be living under some threat of nuclear attack in any capacity at all. And England, perhaps more than any other country, controversy. It didn't help that we classified Iran as an axis of evil. Did we facilitate Iran's nuclear program? Probably not in the current sense. I don't believe that Iran's aspirations to or militarily has anything to do with the current situation. I think that that's something that has been building up for two reasons. One, to be a deterrent to Israel's undeclared nuclear arsenal, and also because of the perception that Saddam Hussein was going to develop a nuclear program at some point. Certainly Israel knocked out the Osirak nuclear reactor in 1981. American posture, if you notice now, is almost deafeningly silent when it comes to the issue of Iran. Iran has really been backburnered for two reasons. One, because of the economic meltdown, and the other because of Pakistan. Pakistan actually does have a nuclear program, and the United States simply does not know. And so most of the people in the State Department right now are focusing on that because for whatever reason, and I'm sorry, I know it's Devil's Night and you probably aren't going to get much sleep anyway, but if you want something else to be insomniac about, it's that we don't know what to do about Pakistan, and it is a nuclear country, and the government and the intelligence agencies are not the most reliable. And so this is really a point where many people have been talking about that American attention absolutely has to be placed to stabilize the regime, to stabilize society, to prevent against radicalization as a result of what's going on. This was why I was in London. I was briefing the British government on radicalization, that American bombs falling in the tribal areas are causing British Pakistani kids to radicalize. And they're not going to radicalize by getting on a plane and going to Pakistan to fight. They're going to stay in London and fight there. And I'm not talking as an Olympic sport. So it's interesting to see then that what we're getting regarding Iran has to be distinguished between what's political and what's policy. And the political rhetoric and the policy just don't match up.
I noticed that you didn't speak much about the spreading of the Iranian Revolution. It's my understanding that the United States has been very concerned from the Iranian Revolution's beginning that Iran has been intent on spreading this revolution, not maybe in a similar way to the French Revolution throughout the region. Is this still the case? Does Iran really want to do that? And should it be a preeminent concern of the United States?
Well, that was probably true when the Iranian Revolution occurred in 1979. In fact, you might say that the Iraq-Iran war, which lasted for 8 years, was to a degree indirectly by a Saudi initiative, and we were behind the Saudis. Iran was our enemy at that time, and the regime in Iraq was a secular. So Saddam Hussein obviously decided to cooperate with us, and he invaded Iran, if you recall. Initially, he was successful, but later on, the Iranians were able to counterattack. And what Saeed said is very true. The Iranian arms, which were imported when the Shah was in power, became really obsolete. They were neglected. The top echelon of the Iranian army was completely decimated by the revolution. So Saddam Hussein thought that it is an easy target, and therefore initially he was successful. But what Saddam Hussein did not anticipate is the ideological commitment of the Shiites, the sense of martyrdom, which until today is very present. They sent waves of small kids against the Iraqi forces. Even though the Iraqis had superior weapons, they were able to defeat the Iraqis with waves after waves of small, young Iranian Shiite kids fighting the Iraqi army. I don't think the Iranians today are really interested in spreading the revolution. The revolution could not be spread because the rest of the neighborhood is Sunni Muslim. In fact, the Saudis now are the arch enemy of Iran. They are so afraid of the Iranians. The Syrians are mainly Sunnis. The Lebanese, well, in Lebanon is a mosaic. Egypt is Sunni. So I find it hard to believe that the Iranians could spread the revolution, really. They may cause some problems among the Shiites in the Arab countries. Mainly if the US attacked or if Israel attacked, yes, the Shiites in the Arab countries, especially in Lebanon, will be a factor in that equation. But otherwise, I really don't see that the Iranians can spread the revolution beyond what they have done so far.
I'd like to just add to that. I think the fact that you raise the image of the French Revolution is absolutely accurate, because I think it helps then frame the revolution as not being a theological imperative, but a political one to get rid of the monarch. In fact, in the 1990s, when President Mohammad Khatami was the leader of Iran and he paid a state visit to France, one of the first places that he visited was the tomb of Jean-Jacques Rousseau at the Pantheon in Paris. I mean, the great Enlightenment thinker and philosopher, in order to pay homage to and demonstrate both the recognition for and the gratitude to the French Revolution in reshaping Iranian society. So you see how it's a political imperative. Iran was trying to, in a sense, export its revolution in the region, not to spread Shiism or necessarily to galvanize Shiism, because the demographics simply wouldn't sustain it, but to try to topple other monarchies. And the irony is that it's the exact same thing that Nasser did in the 1950s, is that he was trying to encourage places like Iraq at the time to topple their monarchy. And in fact, he was successful in 1958 by the use of Radio Nasser, his great radio pulpit. In 1958, Nouri al-Said, the prime minister, King Faisal II, and his uncle Abdullah were all deposed. They were executed. Nouri al-Said tried to leave Baghdad dressed like a woman in a burqa, but apparently some things can't be hidden, and so he was summarily executed. But I agree with Hisham that the main problem that the Iranians have to spread even a political revolution to topple monarchies is not the message, it's the messenger. The fact that they are Shia will provide them to have no traction and no receptivity among the street of countries like, say, Saudi Arabia or Kuwait and all. It just simply discredits the movement in toto, even though the idea of getting rid of the monarch might have some inspiration and influence among the people.
I think their major success, you might say, is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah in Lebanon was really considered by many Arabs as a hero because they stood against the Israeli army. In that sense, I think yes, there is a measure of success. Hezbollah definitely is a success story for the Iranians. The Iranians obviously supply Hezbollah with money, arms, and training. And Hezbollah proved to be a tough force in Lebanon. In that sense, I would say this is a success. But it is a limited success indeed.
Remember, it's in Pakistan that the Saudis, as Hisham pointed out, the arch adversaries to the Iranians, are fighting a proxy war against the Iranians. The Saudis promoting the Sunnis of Pakistan, and the Iranians the Shi'i. And the battlefield is Pakistan. That's why you see all of these mosques being blown up on either side and the conflagration of it. And in many ways, what you see in Pakistan today resembles Spain in the 1930s.
So the U.S. does not need to form a containment policy as they did against the Soviets. They don't need to form a similar containment against Iran. It's not necessary on the part of the United States.
I really don't think so. I think the Iranians, as Saeed said, they have a role to play in the region. And I think they are frustrated because we are trying to block Iran from playing that role. I think once we agree that they have a role in the region, I think we could reach an agreement with them. The Iranians are very pragmatic. To be honest with you, unlike the Arabs sometimes are not very pragmatic. The Iranians are very pragmatic, very, very pragmatic. They want a role, we should acknowledge their role, and I think we reached an accommodation, despite all the rhetoric. As Saeed said, they accepted spare parts from Israel when they were fighting Iraq. I mean, that's a contradiction, isn't it? So obviously that shows pragmatism, and I think pragmatism ultimately will prevail, and it's my estimation that ultimately we will reach an agreement with the Iranians.
Follow up on that point. I mean, how soon will that happen, and what role will the new administration play, whoever gets elected? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I guess it depends on who does get elected, because they seem to have diametrically opposed views on how to handle the situation. Here's the other dirty little secret, and this is what happens when you spend enough time inside the Beltway, as my wife tells me I spend too much time there. We've been talking to the Iranians for quite some time now, and particularly over the issue of what to do in Iraq. In fact, the former nuclear negotiator for Iran, Larijani, was in communication with officials in the U.S. government, and they implored the Iranians to come to the table to talk about Iraq. And they said, we won't even bring up the nuclear issue. And Larijani actually just sat on the letter. And the reason why he sat on the letter was because he could. He realized that at that point, American policy in Iraq was at a stage where America could not dictate the terms. They needed to have Iranian support, particularly with Muqtada al-Sadr, and trying to tamp down on some of the forces which were counterproductive to American interests there. So Iran has been playing a waiting game and has basically dealt with the kind of scorching rhetoric that has come its way from the U.S. and particularly from the politicians. I think it is essential that at some point an American president is going to have to, perhaps not himself, but at least somebody from the State Department, the Secretary of State, is going to have to sit down with the foreign minister of Iran and come up with some kind of an understanding that there have been complicities on both sides, and there have been issues which have been detrimental to both sides, and they're just going to have to come to an agreement of cross-canceling those two things out and then moving ahead. The fact that they're still going to grind this axe only helps in political campaigns. It doesn't help in policy making.
In fact, during the reign of President Reagan, he sent an emissary to the Iranian government. So obviously we have a precedent of the U.S. trying to reach an accommodation with Iran.
Well, that was one of the big conspiracies, is that the coincidence of the hostages leaving Iranian airspace on Inauguration Day, January 20th, 1981. I mean, wow. I mean, that's
done on purpose.
That's well, I'm not going to say that, but I mean, it certainly makes you wonder.
Good evening. Before I ask my question, I would like to react about the parallel that was made between the French Revolution and the Iranian Revolution. I'm French myself, so I feel a little obliged to talk about this. I think it's absolutely inaccurate to make a parallel as such. And I just use two key points. On one side, you have a revolution that led to the formation of an Islamic State. On the other side, a country that probably is in the Western world the country that has achieved the toughest separation between church and state. Just use the Islamic veil law. And another point is the fact that France is a country of declaration of human rights. And on the other side, you have Iran, which is a country that supports terrorism still today in Lebanon against Israel and so on and so forth. But my question was regarding the reformists in Iran before Ahmadinejad was chosen to be the key guy in Iran. There was some hope in the Western world that the reformists would gain momentum. And I was wondering what the weight of these reformists is today in Iran, and if there is any chance, they would come back to the front line at some stage.
Okay.
Thank you
for your question. First of all, I wasn't making a direct parallel between the French Revolution. I merely said that certainly, whether people like it or not, it served as an inspiration. Also, it's important to recognize that it took the French 4 failed republics to finally come to the Fifth Republic. And so it was a work in progress to get to the current.
Never included a religious aspect. I mean, after Robespierre, the issue was set.
Sure, but again, like I said, the book isn't closed on Iran yet. There's still some chapters to be written. Regarding the question about reforms, the two candidates who were up for election, and again, it was an election in 2005. Incidentally, the Iranian parliament has a greater percentage of its representatives as women than even the U.S. Congress. Just to show you the demographics of the representative body. The two main candidates in 2005 were Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and Hashemi Rafsanjani. Rafsanjani, after the Iranian Revolution in 1979, was considered to be hard-line. So you're probably looking at a center-right candidate and a hard-right candidate. The center-left candidacy of Mohammad Khatami had really been discredited primarily because of the economic malaise in Iran. And so he was associated with that movement and really was not able to move forward. Even though Khatami is nothing short of a philosopher king. I mean, here's an individual who has a traditional clerical education, but also his main degree is in Western philosophy. I mean, he's a big fan of Enlightenment thought and understood much as one of his intellectual mentors, Ali Shariati, saw the reconciliation of European political philosophy with the embedded cultural aspects of Shiism in Iran. But again, sometimes there's factors that militate against ideology, and one of those is economics. And so it will take the Iranian people some time to reach escape velocity from that, because of the situation with the price of oil now and the wealth that comes to Iran, they equate the economic success of Iran with the current regime. So there is no incentive for them to then go to a prior regime which they associated with economic marginalization.
I agree with you that Iran, the Iranian Revolution was based on religion. But really, if you take a look at the Shiite sect of Islam, it is like an Iranian identity. Since the rest of the Muslims are Sunni, they are saying we are different, and it's Iranian nationalism is Shiite nationalism. That's how I see it. On the other hand, if you take a look at the Shiite sect of Islam and the Catholic Church, they are quite similar. The Pope is infallible. The Imam in the Shiite sect of Islam is infallible. They have a hierarchy which is almost similar between the Catholic Church and the Shiite in Iran and the Shiites in general.
Yeah, I mean, Shiism really is more, I think, as much a part of the cultural fabric of Iran as Catholicism remains a cultural component within France. I mean, you have to love the complexities of Iranian society. It legally, theologically speaking, you have gender reassignment surgery, and it is one of the most pervasive places for such surgery in the world. Sex change. I mean, so when Ahmadinejad says there are no homosexuals in Iran, he's being extremely nuanced in that argument. He says, yeah, they just get the surgery done. You see?
My question is a rather naive question. As I listen to all of this discussion and the United States influence in the East, in the Middle East, what occurs to me is what would happen if the United States withdrew their military forces and power, A, from Iraq, and B, from Afghanistan, and simply let the Middle East be.
Do you want to take it first?
Definitely there are problems if we all of a sudden withdraw from Iraq. I'm not going to address Afghanistan. My comments are on Iraq. There is a solution, and that solution, I think, was floated around for some time. Initially, the Iraqis need a force to bring about law and order. And that force could be an Arab force. In fact, Egypt and other Arab countries are willing to send a force to replace the U.S. troops in Iraq until Iraq is ready to assume its own affair. I think there's a solution. It's not the solution is there, but of course we have to get the agreement of the United States plus Egypt. But definitely there's a way out. There's a way out. Iraq is in a mess. Let's be honest about it. Iraq is in a mess. There is no question about it. And unfortunately, our policy has not been helpful. A few days ago, we attacked a target inside Syria. What did we accomplish? The Syrians are mad. Syria and the U.S. have been reaching an accommodation recently, and the Syrian government has been cooperating with us a great deal on the question of terrorism. They exchanged names, etc., etc. All of a sudden, we attack. What did we gain? I don't know, to be honest with you. Sometimes our policy in the Middle East, to me, is incomprehensible. I cannot understand it.
That's part of what precipitates my question. Wouldn't the Middle Eastern countries settle all of this stuff? Are we being counterproductive by having a presence there?
I think the presence is schizophrenic. I think that's the best way to describe American foreign policy right now. It just doesn't seem as though it knows what it wants. It wants something, but it's not really sure. I mean, one day it's oil, and that's certainly paramount. And I think perhaps what would be very helpful is if there was a declaration that oil was a national security interest, because at least that way you could form coherent policy around it. It certainly is a much more explicable policy than what guides American policy towards, say, Israel, which doesn't have any kind of strategic or political or diplomatic asset value per se. I mean, it's not that because there's a democracy there, everybody all of a sudden wants to be like Israel. In fact, everything but. And as a corollary to that, Israel itself suffers from American policy in the way that it's shaped. I was speaking with the Israeli Consul General in Chicago, and I said, what does it say about your sovereignty? He says, oh, we're a sovereign country. We're the only democracy in the Middle East. I said, yeah, I've seen the talking points too. You had a deal where you wanted to sell sophisticated weaponry to China, and the United States said, no, you can't do that. And so Israel backed off. I said, that's not exactly emblematic of a sovereign nation. I said, you can go ahead and cook it and sugarcoat it however you want and say, we did it because our friend told us to. BS. It means that you have pressure on you. And the funny thing is that Israeli society is starting to notice this. It is a matter that there are few countries in the world for whom sovereignty and self-determination are not really a reality. They're just simply a pie-in-the-sky ideal. I don't think that full disengagement, as Hisham said, is really going to help the United States. I think it can also be destabilizing to the region. But I think there has to be a reallocation of American attention in the region. We see the legacy of what's happened in Afghanistan as being the fact that in 1989, when the Soviets pulled out of Afghanistan and the wall fell in Berlin, everybody got really giddy and went to Berlin. including the United States, and that wonderful sage of Soviet policy under the first Bush administration, what was her name? Oh yeah, Condoleezza Rice. She decides that we should put all our eggs in the proverbial European basket, even though every European country was already there to help absorb this transition from the Warsaw Pact to a democratization of Europe. There was nobody there for the Central Asian countries. And what do we get there? We get a country like Uzbekistan with a despot, Islam Karimov, who makes Kim Jong-il look like a saint, almost as poorly dressed in fashion sense. American failure of leadership to be in the place where it was most needed set forth a domino effect, to use George Kennan's terms, in what we see now in the region. Now the United States has to reshape the dominoes and realize that if it's going to put a line in the sand, that has to be in Pakistan, not necessarily in Afghanistan. Afghanistan just has the British. I mean, they weren't even able to contain it, 120 years ago. The British go into the Khyber Pass, one guy comes back out. It really is a matter of Pakistan more than any other country. And I'm not saying that as a Pakistani by any stretch of the imagination. That just makes common sense.
In fact, I would recommend, if you are interested in finding a great deal of information about our foreign policy, there is a book which is called Unholy Wars by Jean Cooley. The book is very fascinating. It discusses American foreign policy, in particular in Afghanistan, how we really trained these, we called on Egypt and Saudi Arabia to recruit Muslims to go and fight the infidels, the Soviet atheists in Afghanistan. We gave them aid. In fact, bin Laden himself built a base for us in Afghanistan. I'm talking about Osama bin Laden. Then we abandoned these people and they turned against us. Read the book. It's a very fascinating book called Unholy Wars by Jean Cooley. He used to be, I guess, a correspondent for ABC News.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just a quick comment. Does Iran feel that bin Laden is just a paper tiger over there now and more interested in overthrowing the Sunni royalty? Or
Does Iran feel that way? You're asking about bin Laden? What does Iran feel about bin Laden? Well, Iran is upset at bin Laden because of his support for the Taliban and what the Taliban did to the Shia in Mazar-e-Sharif in Afghanistan. So they are not fans of bin Laden at all, not only the whole Sunni-Shia difference, but also facts on the ground. So if bin Laden goes the way of the dodo, I don't think that Iran is too concerned. And as a corollary to that, let me just add this. All of those idiots out there who champion bin Laden as being some kind of a folk hero, as somebody who stands for principle, I always talk to people and say that bin Laden sits there with that babbling brook and his AK-47 and all, and he sends videos on YouTube. He always seems to have these lofty morals and say that we're fighting this ideological battle against the forces of immorality and all, and largesse and whatnot. You notice he never talks about Dubai. Has anyone been to Dubai? Yeah? Okay. It is Vegas on crack. Okay. It's stunning. I mean, I've been there. This is my third trip. I go practically every year for a conference, and this time I was just disgusted because you realize that all they're trying to do is build these tall buildings and taller buildings and tallest buildings, and they have left no place for a soul. And there's so much money there, and it is really the epitome of decadence. And yet bin Laden has not said one word against Dubai, saying that here's this Western encroachment, because all the buildings are designed by the British, the Germans, and the Americans. All the menial labor is South Asian and Southeast Asian. But bin Laden never uses a target. Otherwise, you'd think that the Burj Dubai, which is now going to be 2,200 feet tall, is bin Laden's fantasy about hitting a building. You have to wonder that whether the Emiratis have paid him off. And more importantly, whether he took it. So much for principle, you see. So these are some of the complexities about the Middle East and how Iran then knows when to stay quiet about certain things.
In fact, Ayman al-Zawahiri, the aide to Osama bin Laden on Al Jazeera television, quite often he attacks the Iranians and the Shiites publicly. So obviously they are not a fan of, bin Laden is not a fan of the Iranians, and obviously there's a problem between the two sides. Why did bin Laden spare Dubai? I think bin Laden did not name any country except maybe Egypt and Jordan in particular. To the rest, he speaks in generalities. Overthrow your rulers. They are tyrant. They are puppets of the West. I don't think he named any one particular except Jordan. I'm sorry, Saudi Arabia and Egypt only.
All right, this is our last question.
Do you think that there's an opportunity now that Osama bin Laden, who wants to overthrow the regime, the monarchy of Saudi Arabia, and Iran's past history in wanting to overthrow that monarchy, is there a chance now for them to be allies of convenience towards that goal?
I'll tell you what. I watch Al Jazeera, which is the most widely watched television station in the region. In fact, there are 60 million people who watch it on a regular basis. In fact, I understand some hotels in the city of New York, they offer Al Jazeera in their rooms. In any case, the issue of overthrowing the monarchy in Saudi Arabia. Al Jazeera has certain talking programs where you can call in and express your views. And when it comes to bin Laden, you'll be amazed that callers from Saudi Arabia itself are calling to support bin Laden. Incredible. How would they tolerate somebody from Saudi Arabia calling and say, I'm supporting bin Laden, the arch enemy of the Saudi royal family? If something should happen in Saudi Arabia, I don't think it will be the result of bin Laden as such. It will happen because of the corruption in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi royal family is so corrupt to the core. So corrupt to the core. They pretend to be Muslims. If you go inside their palaces, you will see a different story. I was in Saudi Arabia for a number of years teaching at King Abdulaziz University. The American embassy was in Jeddah at that time, so they invited members of the political science department for an event. I think it was Independence Day, the 4th of July. So around 10 or 14 of us went to the embassy. After we got in, I saw my colleagues rushing to the bar. They were running toward the bar. They saw me standing back. I didn't. They said, don't you want to drink? I said, no. I said, you are not the ones who are not supposed to drink. They were rushing to the bar. When the Saudis come to Damascus, the Syrians establish a bar in the airport because the Saudis cannot wait to go to Damascus. They have to go to the bar immediately after they reach. The Saudi royal family is corrupt to the core. The amount of money they have is incredible. They spend it right and left. In Europe, in fact, the late King Fahd, when he was, I think, a crown prince, came to Washington and gave a speech about Arab nationalism, blah, blah, blah. And the story in the papers the following day was that he went to Las Vegas and lost $3 million gambling. This is the royal family.
Such is the universal appeal of booze, apparently. I'll use the metaphor here. If you're saying that would Iran and bin Laden form an alliance, if Michigan State beats Ohio State this year, on behalf, because Michigan obviously is not going to be capable of doing it this year, I'm afraid. There's always next year. Michigan will be very happy. It doesn't mean that Michigan's going to like Michigan State any better, nor will they form an alliance.
But you know, Americans can't have it, right?
No. There's some things that are more intractable than the Middle East.
Yeah, I wanted to comment that my cousin has lived in Dubai for almost 10 years. And one of the canals that they were building, if anybody's seen the pictures of Dubai, they're building islands in shape of palm trees.
Right.
My cousin was in an apartment with his family. He's a macroeconomist for General Motors. One of their new canals was coming right down his living room, so they evicted the family.
Has he gone skiing indoors yet? Oh, okay. As a punishment?
He wants his daughter to finish high school in one place. So.
It is one of the few places on Earth where you can actually ski indoors while it's 100 degrees. I've done it. It's quite something. Yeah.
My daughter-in-law spent some time in Dubai looking at property, and her comment was not Las Vegas on crack, but Las Vegas on steroids.
Well, to each his own drug of choice, I suppose.
Well, let's thank our panelists for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Yeah. Let me take this opportunity to remind everybody we would really appreciate if you can just complete a survey for us. And when you go out, hand in the survey, complete it, and you will get a 20% off coupon at the Schuler's. I want to thank everybody for coming. This will be our last event until after the holidays. So wonderful holiday season to all of you and your families. Thank you again.